Hello everyone, welcome back aboard the Night Train for a very special anniversary video. It's been a year, yes, a whole year, since I relaunched this channel and rebranded it from Trained Assassin to the Night Train. In that time I've gained 250 new subscribers, made solid progress on the layout, if not as much as I was hoping, and welcomed a load of new models to my collection. So I just wanted to say a huge thank you to everyone that's watched and subscribed over the last year and helped support this channel as I've tried to get it going again. Trying to get a new channel off the ground and rolling is really difficult in the current hyper-competitive YouTube space, so I just wanted to show a huge appreciation for everyone that's given me their time and support. To mark the occasion, I thought what better way than to go through my entire engine collection so we can have a look at some wonderful locomotives. A lot of my engines are ones that I have seen, ridden on in real life, or hope to see and ride on in real life at some point in the future. There was no proper way to sort these, so I decided to organise them from oldest build date to the most recent build date, so we can get an interesting perspective of changes in locomotive design over time, though some of them are in different liveries from different periods. So, with all of that said, let's get cracking, as we have a lot of engines to look at. First up, we have this icon, Hornby's latest release of Stephenson's rocket. Built in 1829, this was the victor of the famous Rainhill trials, and laid the groundwork for steam locomotive design in the Victorian era. This Hornby model is a fine reproduction of the rocket, a marked improvement in finesse detail over the old Triang one. It isn't as strong as models of later engine designs, but it is a neat piece of history to showcase on the layout. Next up, we have the Liverpool and Manchester Railway's 042 Tiger, a sister locomotive to the preserved Lion. This type of engine was used for goods work on the Liverpool and Manchester Railway, and later on the Grand Junction Railway, the world's first trunk line between Liverpool, Manchester and Birmingham. Tiger was built in 1837 and survived into London and North Western Railway days, during which it was withdrawn and scrapped. With no Grand Junction representative locomotives available in the ready-to-run market, Tiger is the most accurate engine out there in terms of an 1840s locomotive that would have worked on that line at that time. So this fills an important gap historically in my collection. Third up is the London and North Western Railway 222 engine Cornwall in its rebuilt condition. Originally built as a crazy experiment in 1847, Cornwall had 8'6" driving wheels with axles that sat over the boiler. Not really a success by any measure, the engine was rebuilt in 1858 to a more conventional design. In 1911, a director's saloon was attached, giving the engine a new executive use. This was later removed and Cornwall was preserved, and can be found today on static display at the Buckinghamshire Railway Centre. I got this kit-built model with the aim of rejuvenating it someday, as the paint job and numbering leaves a fair bit to be desired. Still, it is a visually interesting and appealing addition to my collection. Moving on to the 1860s and at present my only narrow gauge engine, here we have the Festiniog Small England tender engine Prince. Built in 1863, Prince worked on the Festiniog Railway in North Wales and the Welsh Highland Railway until 1936. Having survived railway closures and ownership changes during an overhaul, Prince survived into preservation and is a mainstay on the Festiniog still. I bought this Kato/Pico model as Prince is one of those engines I aim to see and ride behind in real life, when I eventually make it to the Festiniog. Now we're racing back to the north, with the Bachmann Improved President, number 790 Hardwick. Built in 1873, in 1895 Hardwick took 2 hours and 6 minutes to complete the 141 miles from Crewe to Carlisle. With an average speed of 67.1 miles an hour and a top speed of over 90 miles an hour, this set a new speed record during the race to the north with the East Coast Main Line. Hardwick was withdrawn in 1932, and after a brief return to steam in the 1970s and 1980s, Hardwick is now on static display at Locomotion Shildon. I saw the engine the year it took centre stage on the National Railway Museum's turntable, and this Bachmann model of the engine is a Locomotion Models exclusive, and definitely lives up to the real-life engine's speedy reputation. We move into the pre-grouping era now for a double bill, as we have two Terriers. One and the same, but not. We have my Dapol Stepney model and also my Hornby Stepney model, representing the engine in both its A1 and A1X conditions. Built in 1875, Stepney secured his place in railway history by being the first locomotive acquired by the Bluebell Railway in 1960, and was the first engine to run on what was the first preserved standard gauge railway in the world. This celebrity status earned Stepney his own book in the Reverend Awdry's Railway series, and later an appearance in the TV adaptation of Thomas the Tank Engine. The real-life Stepney was withdrawn in 2014 and, at now over 150 years old, is on static display at the Bluebell Railway. My Dapol Stepney on its own is now pushing 35 years old, and may be lacking the detailing of its modern contemporaries, but it's still a solid runner despite its noisy motor. It was one of the first engines I got over a decade ago, and is the linchpin of everything else that came afterwards in terms of my railway and modelling interests. My Hornby Stepney is an excellent updated locomotive in an earlier build condition, and offers another take and variety on Stepney's long life. Next up we have the Bachmann LNWR Webb Coal Tank number 1054, built in 1888 in real life. Withdrawn in 1939, the engine was offered reprieve by the Second World War and returned to service in 1940. Withdrawn again in 1958, the engine was saved by enthusiasts and preserved, and it is now the only operational LNWR locomotive at present. This model represents the engine in its current preserved livery, plain unlined LNWR black. Our final engine from the 19th century is this, the Caledonian Railway Class 812, number 828. Built in 1899, this engine survived in service until 1963 when it was withdrawn. As the sole surviving example of a pure Macintosh engine, it was preserved and can still be seen running today, currently on long-term loan at the Spa Valley Railway. This Bachmann model of the engine in preserved condition was a limited edition release from Rails of Sheffield and is very sought after. For a long time it was the most expensive engine in my collection, and it's a fine model of an elegant engine. Moving into the 20th century, we return to the Bluebell Railway with the Bachmann South Eastern and Chatham C-Class. This was one of my first renumbering projects from while I was at uni, as I attempted to renumber this into the Bluebell's number 592. Built in 1902, 592 survived in service until 1962, whereafter it was brought into preservation in 1966. The Bluebell Railway became its permanent home, and it is currently on static display awaiting an overhaul. Since the closure of Narrow Planet's custom plate service, I've been one number plate short, so a paper decal has had to do to finish the renumbering job. The next few locos in my collection aren't strictly real. Hornby have produced so many GWR Class 101s in fictional liveries over the years that one was bound to end up in my hands at some point during childhood. It was this one. A gift from my dad in the fictional Crewe and District Quarries livery. Built in 1902 at Swindon, the real-life Class 101 was an experimental oil-burning engine rebuilt to take coal in 1905. Due to design flaws, it never entered proper service and was scrapped in 1911. Hornby's persistent use of this loco's tooling made it a mainstay in the hobby for decades. Last year, I took it upon myself to improve this somewhat, so I painted on some extra detailing, fitted some dummy chain couplings and painted out the inside of the cab. Now to stand out more in that endless sea of 101s. And we're not done with Hornby 101s just yet, as on a trip to the Somerset and Dorset Heritage Joint Railway, I picked up this conversion for £10. It's meant to represent a Midland Railway 1528 class, an interesting tank engine with long side tanks built around 1907. This particular loco was withdrawn in 1963, and none of the class have survived into preservation. I wasn't sure what this was when I saw it, and for only £10 I thought it was an interesting buy. It's definitely not a fine scale example of the class, but adds some intriguing design variation to my collection. It still suffers from the Hornby Smokey Joe pocket rocket energy, so it moves like a firework. Back onto real engines, and they don't get more real than the first engine to ever reach 100 miles per hour. The Great Western Railway's City of Truro. Built in 1903, in 1904 City of Truro achieved a speed of 102.3 miles per hour. This feat secured Truro's place in history, and it was preserved in 1931 upon withdrawal. The engine went on to star in the Railway series, has run multiple times in preservation, starred in the TV show Thomas the Tank Engine, and visited the Netherlands. Withdrawn in 2011, City of Truro is currently on display at the Steam Museum in Swindon. This Bachmann model of the engine is another sought after by collectors, and represents the locomotive in its original built condition as number 3440, not its preserved condition in number 3717. I got this one as that's how Truro appeared in the Thomas the Tank Engine show, which I saw when I was a kid, and I've always associated it with this number and the red frames. And now, once again, we return to the Bluebell Railway and the amazing model given to us by Hattons, the SECR P-Class tank engine. Number 323 was built in 1910 and withdrawn in 1960, entering preservation at the Bluebell Railway just after Stepney in 1960. As the flagship engine of their fleet, the engine was painted blue and given the name Bluebell. The engine is currently undergoing an overhaul before it returns to service. In the meantime, I have this original release Hattons model of the engine, one of the finest detailed, most robustly constructed and best running engines I've ever come across. A rerun of these is being delivered by Accurascale later this year. The first 460 we come across in my collection isn't actually Great Western, but is an exceptionally well kit-built LNWR Clawton. Numbered in an LMS livery, this particular engine was built around 1917 and was one of the last great LNWR express engines. None survived into preservation, nor has anyone taken up making one of these as a ready-to-run model. This engine has been on my dad's wish list and my wish list for many years, and when this example came up on eBay, we decided to split the cost to secure it. The build and finish quality is as close as I've ever seen to a professional ready-to-run standard. But one oversight on our part was the fine-scale design of this kit. This won't go round anything tighter than 6th radius, which is an issue we're going to try and rectify so we can get it running around the 3rd radius curves on our layouts. If anyone watching this has any tips or advice, we're all ears, so comment them down below. Moving towards the end of the pre-grouping era, we finally head over to the Great Northern Railway with the Class N2. Number 1744 was built in 1921, and is the only Gresley designed tank locomotive to survive into preservation. It was withdrawn in 1962 and preserved in 1963. The engine is currently undergoing another overhaul and will be back in service next year. The model of the engine is from Hornby using their N2 tooling and looks splendid in the GNR green and lettering. I don't have many larger tank engines, so this one definitely fills a niche in my collection, and I hope to see and ride behind the real engine once it's back in action. Flying the London and South Western Railway flag in my collection is the Hornby S15. On my project list to be renumbered as 506, which I've ridden on multiple times, this engine was built in 1920 and ran until 1964, when it headed a train of 4 S15s on a final journey to the Wooden Brothers scrapyard on Barry Island. Unfortunately, a blown superheater kept 506 from reaching its destination until August 1965. It languished on Barry Island until 1973 when it was bought for preservation. The engine returned to steam in 1987 on the Crest line, where it can still be found running today. And our final pre-grouping engine is the Bachmann Class G2A Super D, specifically the preserved 49395. Built in 1921 in the LNWR's twilight years, 49395 was selected for preservation as a static exhibit in 1959, and was shuffled around for a few years, growing worse in condition. At one point the engine was considered beyond redemption, until Pete Waterman stepped in to pay for a full restoration in 1993. The locomotive steamed again in 2005 until 2015 when it went back on static display at Shildon. The Bachmann G2A models only depict the engines in their LMS and BR guises, not original LNWR condition. This model shows the engine as I saw it at the Llangollen Steel, Steam and Stars Gala when it was in steam. Our first engine of the grouping era is the most famous steam engine of all, the Flying Scotsman. Built in 1923, this engine was the first to officially be recorded at 100 miles per hour in a record-focused run in 1934, though it wasn't in the best condition after the fact. Withdrawn in 1963, the engine entered preservation and served on charter runs. Scotsman's history involves trips to the United States, Australia, and setting a world record for the longest non-stop run by a steam locomotive. Now in the National Collection, after a lengthy, eye-wateringly expensive overhaul, the engine is in steam once again. I was lucky enough to ride behind Scotsman just after the engine steamed again at the National Railway Museum, so sought a Hornby model of its current preserved condition, smoke deflectors, corridor tender and all. While the engine is something of a Marmite loco in the railway community, you can't deny this is a stunning piece of engineering. Next up, we head back to the Great Western with the Hornby Castle class. This is another to be renumbered as the preserved Pendennis Castle. Pendennis was built in 1924 in Swindon and was withdrawn in 1963. Just a year later, it was used in an anniversary train trying to attain City of Truro's 100 miles per hour, but it topped out at 96 when there were mechanical issues. After that, the engine was sold into preservation at Didcot Railway Centre, but in 1977 it was sold again to work on excursion trains all the way down under in Australia. The engine was offered back to the Great Western Society in 2000, but it wasn't until 2022 when it ran under its own steam again in the UK. From the big to the small now with my Dapol Hawthorne Leslie, the footplate models exclusive Marston, Thompson and Evershed No. 3. Built for the Marston's Brewery in Burton-upon-Trent in 1924, this loco enjoyed a 31-year career before in 1967 Marston was moved to the Foxfield Railway, where it can still be found today. This Dapol model is an absolute delight, packing in modern quality and features in a tiny package. Our first offering from the LMS is the Bachmann Hughes Crab, which is on my list to renumber as 13065, as preserved at the East Lancashire Railway. Built at Crewe in 1927, the engine was withdrawn in 1966 and sent to Barry Scrapyard until it was rescued in 1978. The engine is still based at the East Lancashire Railway, where it is currently undergoing another overhaul. At the start of a stint of grouping Great Western locos, next we have the Great Western 5600 class, also produced by Bachmann. Again on my list to renumber as 6695, the real-life engine was built in 1928, withdrawn in 1964 and also ended up at the Barry Scrapyards. It was saved in 1979, but had to wait until 2006 to have its restoration completed. The engine has since been relocated to the Swindon and Cricklade Railway, where it can be found today. Downsizing slightly, here we have the Bachmann Great Western 5700 class pannier tank engine. On my list to renumber as 7754, the real-life engine was built in 1930 and was withdrawn in 1959, when it was sold to the National Coal Board. The engine remained in work in various collieries until 1975, when it was donated to the National Museum of Wales. The engine has been a staple in the fleet of the Llangollen Railway, where it returned to steam again earlier this year. This Bachmann model is quite nice, but I look forward to seeing the depth of contrast when the new Accurascale pannier tank comes out early next year. Downsizing slightly again, we have another pannier, the more peculiar Helgen 1366 class. This engine differs by having a shorter wheelbase and outside cylinders. To be renumbered as the preserved 1369, this sole survivor of the class was built at Swindon in 1934 and used primarily as shunters. 1369 was withdrawn in 1964 and was purchased into preservation, Today, the real-life engine resides at the South Devon Railway in working order. This is the first Helgen model in my collection we've come across, and was one I was hesitant to buy for a while due to their temperamental nature. So far I've had no issues, so hopefully things stay that way. On to another familiar Great Western design. Here we have the Hornby 1400 class, specifically the limited edition model of 1450, produced as a Worley exhibition exclusive in 2017. 1450 was built in Swindon in 1935, lasting in service for 30 years. Upon withdrawal, it was purchased by the Dart Valley Railway. The locomotive now lives at the Severn Valley Railway and is currently nearing the end of an overhaul. This Hornby model captures the last livery it ran in well, but uses an existing tooling rather than a bespoke one that is an accurate representation of the real engine. Typical Hornby shenanigans. Up next is perhaps the second most famous real-life engine in the world. The Great Western Hall class Alton Hall, in its Hogwarts Castle guise. Built in 1937 in Swindon, the engine was withdrawn in 1964 and sent to Barry Island scrapyards, where it languished until it was bought for preservation in 1981. The engine achieved worldwide fame starring as the fictional engine Hogwarts Castle throughout the Harry Potter film series. After its movie career, the engine can now be found on static display at the Harry Potter Studio Tour in Leavesden, under a loan agreement with Warner Brothers Studios. This engine is from a later edition Hornby Harry Potter train set, when they used a Hall class locomotive to represent it instead of an incorrect Castle class, and this later edition also features a working lamp. From one famous engine to another, here we have the post-World War II speed record holder, the LNER A4 Sir Nigel Gresley. Built in 1937, this streamlined engine was named after its designer, and has pulled the Royal Train in its career. In 1959, the engine set the official post-war speed record for steam traction at 112 miles per hour. Sir Nigel Gresley was saved for preservation in 1966, and has been a mainline charter icon ever since. Its most recent overhaul was completed in 2022, and it can be seen today up and down the country on mainline excursions and heritage railways. Having ridden behind this A4, due to the extortionate prices of the Hornby Dublo and Dapol Black Label renditions of this engine, I had to settle for this rather outdated but BR Blue liveried Bachmann model. Having this version of Sir Nigel was better than not having one at all. Jumping across continents now, and we have my first somewhat customised engine in this collection. This is the Japan National Railways Class C56, specifically engine C5323 from the State Railway of Thailand. This engine was built between 1935 and 1939 and shipped over to Thailand during Japanese wartime occupation, where it worked on the infamous Death Railway built by prisoners of war under horrific conditions. Today, the locomotive is displayed on a plinth as part of a memorial around the bridge over the River Kwai. Due to the tropical humidity, the engine is slowly succumbing to rust and deterioration. Having ridden on the Thai Railway from the bridge to Bangkok, I imported a Kato C56 and repainted parts of it with some custom printed lettering and emblems. It's a unique engine in my collection, and subscribers may recognise this model as the one I used for my original character Louis in my Thomas fan series, Sodor the Magic Within. Returning to the UK now, and we have another large Pacific, the Hornby Coronation class Duchess of Sutherland. Built in 1938, this LMS engine is another notable for its speed, reaching 110 miles per hour on one wartime run. The engine was withdrawn in 1964 when it was acquired by Butlin's Heads of Eyre holiday camp. In 1971, it then vacated the site through different museums until the Duchess ended up at the Midland Butterley Railway in 1996. The engine was restored to working order by 2001 and is another mainline certified engine, doing tours around the country while still based at the Midland Butterley. Hornby have only done 2 versions of the engine in LMS Crimson Lake. This is the newer version, which I managed to get from Hatton's apart from the set it was released in. First up, in a bullied double bill, we have the Mighty Merchant Navy, as modelled by Hornby. This will be renamed and renumbered at some point into 39006 Peninsula and Oriental Steam Navigation Company, as preserved at the Gloucestershire-Warwickshire Railway. Built in 1941, 35006 was withdrawn in 1964 and sent to Barry Scrapyard. It wasn't until 1983 that the engine was saved for preservation, though it would take until 2016 for that to become a reality. The engine is now in service once again on the GWSR, and this later release of the Hornby Merchant Navy is one of the most recent additions to my collection. Our next bullid is the Hornby Southern Railway Q1 locomotive. As one of my early renumbering projects, this represents preserved engine C1. Built in 1942 and withdrawn in 1964, but preserved at the National Railway Museum. After a stint at the Bluebell Railway from 1977 to 2004, C1 returns to the NRM where it remains on static display. In recent years, the Swanage Railway approached the museum about returning the engine to steam, but negotiations were unsuccessful. Besides my Dapol Stepney, this is one of the oldest, original engines in my collection. Onto one of the most ubiquitous saddle tank engines of the late steam era, we have the EFE Rail J94 Austerity locomotive. This saddle tank is another I'll renumber as preserved engine 68067, which has been instrumental in the Llangollen Railway's recent difficult history. The engine was built in 1943 as part of the war effort, and hopped around locations until it was sold into preservation in 1982. It returned to service in 2017. This EFE model is a re-release of the DJ Models tooling, with some issues resolved for this latest release. Next up we have a pair of Bullid Pacifics, one of which closes off the grouping era. First up is the Battle of Britain class Blackmore Vale. An elder of my collection, much like the Q1, this Hornby model was put a bit through the ringer by my younger self, almost losing a smoke deflector. The real engine was built in 1944 and lasted its entire career in its unrebuilt form. It entered preservation at the end of steam, during which it became one of the Bluebell Railway star engines. Blackmore Vale is currently undergoing another overhaul, so will steam again in the years to come. And into the British Railways era we go, with the familiar shape of the West Country class City of Wells. Again a Hornby Bullid Pacific model. Built in 1949, Wells was withdrawn in 1964 and sent to the Wooden Brothers scrapyard, but was saved in 1971 by a group from the Cayley and Worth Valley Railway. Today, the engine resides at the East Lancashire Railway, returning from a rapid overhaul last year. I've replaced the standard Hornby number plates with some from the Wren release of the engine, giving it a little more visual pop. And now enters my first engine from Rapido, with the Western Region 1500 class, a late, fresh take on the classic pannier tank. Preserved engine 1501 was built in Swindon in 1949, but lasted little over 10 years before being withdrawn in 1961. The engine was then sold to the National Coal Board and remained working until 1969, when it was again withdrawn. 3 of this class were then preserved by the Severn Valley Railway, but only 1501 survived, with the others being sold for scrap or used as spares. 1501 returned to steam in 1997 and has become a mainstay on the line, becoming known as the Raging Bull by volunteers. This Rapido model, for better or worse, tries to capture every intricate detail and is a dense, compact beast. It won't be the last from Rapido to join my collection, that's for sure. Harking back to the days of the LMS, up next is the Bachmann Class 2MT Ivet locomotive. This one is to be renumbered 46447, as preserved at the East Somerset Railway. Built at Crewe in 1950, this engine was withdrawn in 1966 and ended up in Barry scrapyards, but was saved in 1972. It took up until 2014 and a move to the East Somerset Railway before 46447 steamed again, and it can be found there today on the tail end of its boiler certificate. This Bachmann model is a splendid one, capturing the unique shape and design that proliferated across lines during the BR days. While Crewe followed Ivet's path, Swindon followed Collett's with the Manor class. My manor of choice was 7822 Foxcote Manor. Built in 1950 as well, Foxcote Manor was withdrawn in 1965 and sent to Barry Scrapyard, when reprieve came in 1972. It arrived at the Llangollen Railway in 1985 and was restored, becoming a staple locomotive on the line. The locomotive has recently been lent to the West Somerset Railway with an agreement until 2026, but in 2023 it had to be withdrawn for overhaul early due to the failure of the BR era copper welds in the firebox. This Bachmann model of the engine depicts it as I recall seeing and riding behind it at the Llangollen. Dapol's new Manor range features the engine in BR black, but unless they do a BR green I won't be upgrading. While dated by modern standards, this Bachmann version does fine for me. And now back to Ivert with another Bachmann 2MT, this time the tank engine variety. This model will be renumbered into 41312 as preserved on the Watercrest line. Built at Crewe in 1952, this plucky survivor managed to last in service until 1967, before it was withdrawn and carted off to Barry Island. It was bought and saved in 1974 and eventually ended up at the Watercrest line in 1995, before moving under its own steam again in 1998. The engine is still operational and a resident on the line. Unlike the tender version, this Bachmann Tank 2MT is starting to show its age, so I'd welcome a new tool's take on this engine if anyone's listening. Now it's round 2 of the austerity saddle tanks, this time featuring the DJ Models version. This engine is Wilbert, one of a limited edition 200 model run. The real loco was built in 1953 for the National Coal Board, and wound up in preservation at the Dean Forest Railway in 1973. In 1987 it was renamed in honour of the author of the railway series, the Reverend Wilbert Awdry, and his son Christopher Awdry wrote a dedicated book, Wilbert the Forest Engine. Wilbert is currently undergoing an overhaul, so will return to service in the coming years. This DJ Models model captures the likeness well, but the paint feels too dark and other examples of this tooling have had running issues. Fingers crossed that once my layout is done and this sees regular running, that all goes smoothly. Finally, we get onto some diesels. The first large diesel in my collection is the Helgen Class 28 Kobo D5705. This diesel was built in 1954, but barely outlasted the end of steam as it was withdrawn in 1968. D5705 was fortunate enough to enter departmental use, surviving into preservation much by accident. It is currently being restored to working order at the East Lancashire Railway. I bought this model as a second Kobo for use in my Thomas fan film Boko, and opted for the preserved example with the hopes of seeing it working one day. And after traversing 130 years of steam engine design, we get to the last. The BR Class 9F, specifically the Bachmann model of 92214. A Bachmann Collectors Club exclusive. 92214 was built in 1959, lasting little over 6 years in service before withdrawal in 1965, where it ended up at the Barry Scrapyards. In 1980 it was saved, and returned to steam at the Midland Butterley Railway in 2003. The engine has since become a regular on the Great Central Railway and is currently awaiting overhaul as its boiler ticket expired last year. The Bachmann model came with 2 sets of nameplates that the engine has worn in preservation, Leicester City and Central Star. As I saw this engine and rode behind it at the Llangollen Steel, Steam and Stars Gala when it was Central Star, these are the nameplates I added. No railway collection would be complete without a Class 08 shunter, one of the most numerous engines ever. Weirdly enough, it was my partner that wanted one of these after seeing 604 Phantom at work at the Didcot Railway Centre. Built in 1959, the engine was eventually bought by the Great Western Society and is one of the site's regular workhorses. Hornby have done a wonderful, if expensive model of the engine, which I thankfully managed to pick up second hand for half its £185 asking price. Jumping forward several decades and to the only DMU in my entire collection, here we have the Class 150/2 in the Arriva Trains Wales livery. 150246 is still at work on the mainline network today, having been introduced way back in 1987. The Class 150 is the train I have ridden on the most in my lifetime, along the Crewe to Chester line as part of my old work commutes. Engine numbers change along the route, but 150246 has worked it. Having ridden this train in this livery close to 200 times, it felt right to have one at home in my collection. And jumping into the 21st century, we have the Class 57/3 named Jeff Tracy in the Virgin Trains livery. A rebuilt Class 47, this engine began working in 2002, but in 2003 was fitted with retractable electric couplers. A fleet of 57/3s were designated as Thunderbirds and given names from the Jerry Anderson show. Their role was to rescue broken down electric trains and to guide electric services over non-electrified routes. Certainly a much nicer purpose and nickname than the Zombie or Body Snatcher, as members of the class were also known. I saw these engines operating, often sitting idly in sidings around Crewe while I was growing up. Jeff Tracy was a frequent sight, so I picked up this Bachmann model second hand as it was produced as a Hereford Model Centre exclusive. It's a lovely model, but it's a shame that the coupler can't be set down as if it was in use. But it's a perfect diesel to have idling in a siding, on standby, or moving light engine around the layout. While the Class 57/3 is the most modern engine in my collection, there is one more from the 21st century. Technically built in the 20th century, in 2011, a small motoring show called Top Gear gave an old Jaguar XJS the train treatment and created the TGV-12 sports train. Post-episode, the car train hybrid was put on show at the World of Top Gear exhibition at the Bewley Motor Museum, where I got to go on its caravan carriage. As such, I wanted one for my model railway, and this custom Oxford diecast conversion was born. It's unpowered, but still quite the head turner despite its size. And that, as it stands, is my entire locomotive collection. It is definitely going to grow as I have a ton of engines on pre-order that I'm waiting to arrive, so we'll have to revisit this list at some point down the line. A lot of you will be wondering what the heck's happened to all of my Thomas models. I'm not showing any of those. But don't worry, I'm planning to do a separate video covering those specifically in the near future. Trying to fit all of my models into a singular video would mean we'd be sitting here for hours on end, and you'd all lose interest before that, trust me. That is the collection as it currently stands, a ragtag group of different engines from different eras, regions, and in different liveries. So let me know which engine, livery, or era is your favourite down below, and if you didn't see it here, let me know what it is and why. Thanks again for watching and supporting the channel over the last year. If you've just found me and this is your first time finding the channel, please make sure that you subscribe, like the video, and maybe check out some of my other videos and playlists of stuff I've released, as the content's only going to continue to grow, trust me. So, with all that said, I'll see you in another video very soon. Take care.